All right, we've got 9:29, so if everyone wants to grab a seat, please, then we will get started here very shortly. All right, then I am going to ask one of my fellow bald guys, Curtis, if he would be willing to open in prayer this morning. Yeah. Amen. All right, you can turn in your booklets to chapter 26. We are looking at section 9 here today, continuing on the topic of the church, and I think I'm pretty sure this is the biggest chapter in the confession. So we've been in it for a while and will be for a bit longer yet. So chapter 26, section 9 in your confession says this: Christ has appointed the way to call someone prepared and gifted by the Holy Spirit to the office and overseer of overseer or elder in a church. He must be chosen by the collective vote of the church itself. He must then be solemnly set apart by fasting and prayer. The body of elders of the church must lay hands on him if there are any already in place. A deacon must be chosen by the same kind of vote and set apart by prayer and laying on of hands as well. Okay, and so again, this is a continuing on with how do we govern ourselves in an orderly and, more important, biblical manner. And here, well, first of all, I think we should note that when we're talking about church governance here, there's kind of three groups that we think about in terms of governance, which is elders, deacons, and members. What's notably absent compared to the way we do things today is committees, a church council. Okay, these things don't exist in the Bible because they're just not a biblical way to govern the church. In terms of the governance of the church, there's only three meaningful categories. Again, elders, deacons, and members, and they all have a role to play here. And this confession advocates a view of church governance called congregationalism, and I've mentioned that before, and so I'll just mention again. Congregationalism simply means that each local church governs her own affairs. That has sometimes been applied today to like pure democracy, and that's fairly common in the Mennonite circles that I come from, which is like pure democracy. Are we going to put another yard light in the parking lot? Well, we need to have a membership meeting so we can decide that. Like it's pure democracy, which typically does not go well because everything kind of gets politicized. Congregationalism means that the elders, depending on the word, the old men would talk about the elders' rule with membership assent. Okay, so this is elder governance with congregational assent or membership assent. So it's not top down like a denominational hierarchy, and it's not bottom up like pure democracy. This is government by those who are set out to govern, but always with congregational assent. And you see that most notably here, and this is probably the biggest point of difference versus non-congregationalist models. Noticed here, you don't just install elders or deacons without membership assent, right? So the elders may present names, but nobody gets installed without the assent of the membership. Okay, so this is probably the most important check and balance that the members of a church have is to only install those that that they desire to install. So this, we are used to this kind of government in the political world because actually, and again, this maybe seems strange, I've mentioned this before, I'm pretty sure, our whole system of parliamentary government is based on Puritan church government. The reason we have the government we have in Canada and Great Britain is because of the Puritans. It's because of this. They took basically Westminster style of church government and they said, let's do that with a nation. Each region sends forth a representative. That representative makes decisions on behalf of the people in their riding, so the people have a voice. But thankfully, Canada is not a democracy, which is very good. Unfortunately, we're moving that way. And the United States was even more sure to make sure that they would never become a democracy. So when people say we live in a democracy, be thankful you don't. Okay? Because then nothing could happen unless you got 51% on everything. That's democracy. It's a terrible system of government. It never has worked. I don't think it can work. What we have is a democratic process to elect representatives. That's what we have, and that's what we mean when we say we live in a democracy. But we don't live in a democracy. In Canada, we have a parliamentary monarchy. In the United States, they have a republic. Neither country has a democracy. That's very good. You don't want democracy. If we had a democracy, here's what we could do. Ron's got a piece of land that I'd like, and so we could make a vote here and decide, 75-1 that Ron's land now belongs to us. And we're kind of moving in that direction, aren't we? Right? People in the church and in the wider world of civics realize this system will only work until people realize that they can vote other people's money into their bank account. And that's exactly where we're at today. Right? Will the rich finally pay their fair share? And democracy quickly turns into mob rule. It's kind of like wolf pack justice. And here what we have is a rejection of that and also a rejection of top-down. You went to Anglican seminary, now the Archbishop will appoint you to your church. Whether those people want this priest or not doesn't really matter. They've got no say. It's pure top-down hierarchy. So I think this is a healthy middle way, and not just because it's designed to be a middle way, but I think it's taking the various biblical data seriously. That elders are actually to rule, but not in an absolute sense, and the church, speaking through her members, has a say and has a mechanism to install or remove elders, or to have actual meaningful input as well. So, I'll stop there. Again, that's congregationalism, historically understood in a nutshell. We can get into the text here. Questions on this style, what you're used to, what other practices are in church history, that kind of thing? Any discussion or questions on that? Okay. Okay, so James is asking, like in terms of the membership giving their assent to decisions or consent, is that the officers of the church rule with the assent, or I'd use those terms interchangeably there, or the consent of the governed. We have that in civil government as well, again, based on Puritan church government. But basically, if nobody is happy with the job that Ted Falk is doing, it's quite simple. Don't send him back. If you're very unhappy with the work that an elder is doing, you have a way to remove him or to not install him in the first place. And in our own constitution, we have mechanisms for installing and for removing as well, initiated by the members. And with the final say going to the membership of the church. Yeah, so that's simply what's meant there. And that is unique to to this form of government, right? If you're an Anglican or a Roman Catholic, that doesn't factor in at all at any point in the process. More on this. I'm curious, how many of us come from basically a democracy background? The membership decides everything, even mundane, day to day. I certainly do. We even voted on doctrine sometimes, which is, well, that turned out well. But then who would come from a very top-down system of governance where the members basically don't have a say? Does anyone come from that kind of a background? Growing up Catholic, yes, you would have. Yes, Tina would have had that kind of church government, yeah. And Catholicism works very much with the top-down system, right? You're just ordained and they'll send you the priest, right? And local considerations don't play almost any factor. And if you think of the Catholic churches in French-speaking Manitoba, they're almost all French-speaking Africans at this point, because Canadians don't go to seminary in the Catholic Church. So a lot of the small Catholic towns, if they want to have a French-speaking priest, you're going to Sierra Leone, or you're going to Mozambique, or you're going somewhere else to find a French-speaking priest. But the local congregation doesn't have a say in that. Okay, but English-speaking, I would imagine. Okay.
But it's just like, oh, the guy that we had for 4 years, we really, really liked him, but he's gone.
Okay.
And now there's a new one coming in for whatever reason.
Right. Okay, so Tina's just saying her parents just got a new priest at their Catholic parish, and that was just...
Some sort of rotation?
Yeah. I did a little bit of research here. We've got enough Dutch people. Should I share something about the Dutch? Do I put a positive spin on it, or am I going both barrels here? How are we feeling about the Dutch today? Time to do violence to the Dutch? No? Okay. I won't. What I found strange is in a lot of Dutch Reformed circles, you go through ministers like every 4 or 5 years, which seemed very strange to me. And I've asked some of our Dutch people, like, why is that? Like, a minister just kind of starts growing roots in a church, and then another church calls him away, and then he's gone. And that's not just a one-off. Like, that's very common. I saw that in Carmen and in Thunder Bay both when I was working for Landmark Feeds. I saw that lots. Minister's here for 4 years, another church in Southern Ontario calls him, he's gone, someone else from Alberta is in, and it's just this rotation of ministers. And so I did a little bit of research. Why is that? Because in the English Reformed world, the longer your ministry could endure in one church, the better. You'll just know the people better. Ideally, you call a young man from your own church. You don't import someone. You're raising up young men from within your own church that understand the people well, and hopefully he has a long ministry. The best research I could find, and maybe some of our Dutch people can correct me if this is wrong, but is the Dutch had more of an interconnected system in the Netherlands of synods and classes and councils, which is basically just kind of regional government. And they were having trouble with ministers just moving on their own initiative. And they said, this isn't good for the church. Ministers can't choose to leave. So as a protection from having rotating ministers, they set up the system of synods and classes that said you cannot leave unless another church calls you. The unintended consequence of which was just churches just keep calling everyone. So it's doing the exact opposite of what it was designed to do. It was designed to keep ministers in one spot. And what ended up happening is now they just have a formal system of calling ministers away from other places, and it's above board. I mean, they're following the rules, but the rules were designed to do the opposite of kind of what it has done. And I understand that in some of those denominations, there's discussion on this and saying maybe longevity is more important than moving everyone around. And it also, in the early 1900s, someone I'd consider an absolute hero of the Christian faith, Abram Kuyper, who was a theologian and university president and prime minister of the Netherlands and a newspaper publisher and a very, very extremely gifted and competent man. When he was working at re-Christianizing the Netherlands, he also had the mindset that the best ministers need to get into the most strategic locations. So if you're in some little small Dutch village, that's a waste. You should be in Rotterdam preaching directly to the civil authorities. And so Kuiper actually encouraged this a little bit too. Like, get them out of the small rural backwoods places. The most effective ministers need to be in the most public places. You can understand the logic there, but it comes at a cost as well. So that's a bit of the background of other kind of church world. And of course, if you're from a Mennonite background like myself, the priesthood of all believers means that everyone basically has an equal say on everything, even doctrine. So if brother so-and-so has been thinking about this for 28 seconds already while sitting at the membership meeting, that's roughly equal to someone who's dedicated a lifetime to study because of the priesthood of all believers. Okay? And besides, he prayed about it, so what are you going to say? Okay, that's not healthy either. So I come from an extreme democracy kind of background. Probably many of us do. But whatever, that's just to give a bit of a broader picture of different practices that exist in the Christian world. More on that, Tim. Okay, so Tim's asking this another question related to this. How well informed am I on why the Dutch churches tend to have terms for elders and deacons, and the English-speaking world did not? How well informed am I on that? Not at all. I've looked for answers. I don't know. I don't know if some of our other people do. I asked Samuel Renahan about this in Chilliwack. He didn't know. I can't find anyone that knows why the Dutch moved to terms. Because basically the rest of the Reformed world, it's elder or deacon is a calling. It's not a term. It's a calling on your life. So you're giving your life for this office. Doesn't mean you can't resign, but it means all things being equal, it's a calling. And if your wife gets dementia and she needs permanent care, well, then you just resign. But does anyone have an answer for that? I have never found an answer. I've never found an answer. No? Okay. Anything else before we dig into the text here on governance generally? Say that again. Oh, after 65 you're out? I've never seen that one. Okay, so Mr. Ginter is saying in his background at 65 it's mandatory stepping down. I don't know the background of that either. I can't say. I don't know. I haven't seen that personally. That's kind of a natural age where people might be slowing down and thinking they want less. So, but that it's a mandatory step down, I don't know. I mean, we live in an age where people stay healthy for pretty long. Some people stay pretty clear-headed into their 70s and 80s now. So I think it could be a waste of 15 good years of a man's life to make that mandatory. But I don't know. Maybe in a day when people live till the ripe age of 38, that made sense. I don't know. I really don't know. No. More on this. With the church? Yeah. Yeah, so Rob is saying, and I think there's biblical wisdom on that one, so Rob is saying too that, I gather in your experience too, the young men, this wasn't for them, typically, to be a church elder or a deacon. I think there's some wisdom to that because what's one of the criteria to be an elder or a deacon? You must manage your household well. Can a 22-year-old with a 6-month-old baby, is he tested that he can manage his household well? Do we know that yet? It doesn't mean he can't. It just means the church doesn't have enough information to go on. Therefore, maybe he's gifted as an elder, but let's wait. Let's see what the fruit of his family shepherding is first, and then we will determine whether he fits the biblical criteria. Is there a hard age limit? No, not that I understand. one of the best bits of advice that I got when I became a deacon in a former life was actually from Keith Workington's grandpa, who was quite an old man at the time. And he told me very, very certainly, your most important church is Tanya and your kids. And if that means you have to miss some things when the church doors open, then miss it, because that's more important than being at the church every single time the doors open. I thought that was good advice. I still do. And I was a pretty young man then. I was still in my 30s. I thought that was good, but the most important church for any man is his wife and his children. So every husband is a pastor, and that's where he has to be tested first. If he's got capacity and is in a season of life to take more than that, wonderful, that's great. But even if you are Charles Spurgeon, your most important church is your wife and your children. And if that's suffering, then you need to take a step back. Lisa. Good question. Okay, this is why I like interactive here. Never know where it's going to go. Lisa's asking the requirement to be the husband of one wife. What does that all entail? In context, it for sure entails you're not a polygamist, because polygamy was relatively common. So the Oak Ridge boys are right. Trying to love two women is like a ball and chain. So you're not eligible for church elder if you're a polygamist. I think a very reasonable extension of that is also that if you've been unlawfully divorced and remarried, you're also a husband of more than one wife, not at the same time. There's debate on that. Some people would say divorced men are eligible for church elder. Others would say no. So there's debate on that one. I think given the additional requirement that an elder manages his household well, I think that just assumes he's married. Right? I would personally, and I'm answering only for myself, I would feel quite uncomfortable getting a single man to be an elder. Not because his character is bad, but just the way you're going to relate to women is different. The way you understand family counseling is going to be different. Like, there's just a whole world that you're not tested in. So I think there is some biblical wisdom there. And if you're wondering, okay, well, how does that square with Roman Catholics who forbid marriage? The one woman in their understanding is the church. So you're the husband of one wife, i.e. Mother Church, so you don't have a human wife because you're married to Mother Church. That's the Roman Catholic understanding of that passage. I think it's wise that only married men serve as elders. But I've seen single men serve as elders, so not everyone agrees with that, obviously. I don't know what your background is or what your practice that you've seen there. Okay. Yeah. Well, this isn't a biblical, well, it's kind of a biblical argument. My question would be, if you're a 24-year-old single pastor and someone comes to you with a broken marriage in hand, honestly, what do you have to say? Not a ton. How well do you understand the heaviness of little children years? Not at all. What do you understand about raising teenagers? Nothing. And I'll give an actual example. Again, this isn't a biblical example, this is a practical one, so weigh it accordingly. My last year working at Landmark Feeds, I went to 2 funerals for 2-year-old girls who died in farming accidents in the same summer, and it was pretty terrible. The one family was Catholic, and so a single priest. And about a year after this accident, this wife, the mother of this little girl who died, became pregnant again. And the priest said, see, it's kind of like a dog. Like, you lose one and then you get another one. You have to be single to say something that out of touch. Like, no one who's married with children would, you can't even think in those terms if you're married and you understand that this child isn't a replacement for that one. This is its own child. Would all people be that insensitive? No. But I don't think that's a mistake a married man would make. At least not as easily. Not that married men don't make mistakes. Ask me how I know. But I just don't think it's wise. I think the biblical pattern, husband of one wife, and he manages his household well, which means there's a certain level of experience that he's got. I think that's the biblical model. More on this. Steve, and then Pete. What age of children can you test someone to be an elder? Right. Yeah, okay, so what do I think? Well, I think that's one of those things where biblical wisdom is tougher and less precise than a hard and fast rule. So I don't think there's a set age that you can just say, yeah, by age 4 we know this guy's qualified or not, or by age 13 we know if this guy's qualified or not. I don't think it's that simple. I just think you look at the pattern of life. I am a big believer that the concrete on a child's heart is pretty hard by age 4 or 5. Not that it's unworkable, but by age 4 or 5, you get a pretty good idea whether there's discipline in this house or not. Right? So I think that's an early indicator. One of my favorite kind of well-known evangelical preachers, Douglas Wilson, would say you're disqualified if even your adult children leave the faith. He would take that your children aren't insubordinate. He would take that right to, if I'd go off the rails, my dad would be disqualified to be an elder. I'm not sure I'd be willing to take it to that age level. I think as long as the children are in your house and they're under your rule, that's a picture of what kind of parenting is happening, at least to some degree. So if a 45-year-old departs the faith, does his father have to step down? There's disagreement there, but I think at a certain point it's not indicative of a father. But certainly age 3 and 4, are temper tantrums allowed? Is laziness allowed? Right? You're starting to see those things pretty early on, what's allowed and what's not allowed. Is a kid allowed to sleep till 10 in the morning? Right? Are they allowed to be a picky eater? Like those things, those are the kinds of things I'm watching for personally, and other people might be looking for different things, but those are the kinds of things I'm looking for to see if there's discipline in the home or not. Right. There was another hand here someplace. Pete? Right. Yeah, so Pete's just mentioning from personal experience, a father that gets consumed in the public ministry, you felt you didn't really have a dad because your dad belonged to the church. Yeah. And that is, and I will say this firsthand, it's a very hard thing to regulate because church life can absolutely just speak for every waking second of your life. And at the end of the day, we are still husbands and fathers. And so, especially for a young man, I think it's unfair to throw a young man in there where your children have like actual physical needs for dad to be present. I mean, if you want to be sure, this wasn't from church ministry. This was someone who was far too consumed in their dairy farm. And I was talking to the son, who's older than me. None of you know this person, so don't try to guess. But we were visiting coffee, and he said, yeah, Dad never made it to any of my hockey games, and Blumenort used to still have an outdoor rink. And so sometimes after a hockey game, I'd sit there in the cold for 2 hours for Dad to finish up in the barn, and they'd pick me up. And all my friends were long gone. This guy's older than me, so this is like many years ago that this happened. And then he just said, do I hate my dad? And he thought about that question that just came out of his mouth for an unhealthy amount of time. No, I don't think I hate him. Like, boy, that's, right? That was a dairy farm, not a church. But the fact that he had to think about the question he just heard out of his mouth, like, boy, that, like if something that's not eternal, like a dairy farm or church ministry, takes that much, that it costs your family, that's not worth it. And so is there an age limit? No. Do I think it's wise to throw a 24-year-old in there? Unless there's exceptional circumstances, I don't see what good would come of that necessarily. And there may be exceptional circumstances, so I'm not going to make that a hard and fast rule. More on this. This has gone completely not where I thought, and that's 100% good. And this is why I was telling my nephew on the way here, I don't actually prepare for Sunday school because it's dealer's choice every Sunday. You have no idea where this is going to go. Let's get into the text so we can at least finish this section here. So in support of this first statement here, footnote 16, it says, Christ has appointed the way to call someone prepared and gifted by the Holy Spirit to the office of overseer or elder in a church. He must be chosen by the collective vote of the church itself. And in support of that, who wants to read Acts 14:23? Keenan's got that. Okay, so again, you get the picture that this is a church-wide activity. So they're appointed by the apostles, so someone has to take the initiative and work with this process. But each church receives them with prayer and fasting and then are committed to the church. So again, this isn't all done by the elders and it's not all done by the membership. You see kind of this dance between the existing officers and the church membership as a whole, both being involved there. Let's go through all of these and then we can open it up again. Okay, in the next section here, then in support of note 17, he must then be solemnly set apart by fasting and prayer. The body of elders of the church must lay hands on him if there are any already in place. And for that, who wants to take 1 Timothy 4:14? Ryan's got that. Okay. Has anyone wondered, it's a curious thing, and we did this when we ordained our deacons, why do we lay hands? What's behind that? Has anyone ever thought about that? It's kind of a weird thing, isn't it? Rob's about to lay hands on Ray. Not sure how that's going to go. Why do we do this? What's being communicated? I'll give you a hint. It has a little bit something to do with where we're at in Hebrews in our sermon series. Why do we lay hands on officers? Victor? Identification, yes. Yeah, to identify them so that it's clear who's being ordained, right? And the church is, you're singling someone out, it's very visible. Yep. Yep. There's something else kind of closely related to that I'm thinking of. Harry. I think there's something there. Of course, we're not transferring sin onto new officers, but there is a legitimate transference. Yep. And that's another piece. Lisa? The weight, yeah, it's serious. And anytime something is serious, there should be ceremonies around it to show, like to mark the seriousness of an event. So yes, I think these are all right so far. Steve? Yep. And that was kind of the last piece that I was thinking of, is this continuity. We've been doing this for all of church history. There's just this natural, the next link in the chain is being recognized. You're next. And one day you're going to be the one laying hands on the next guy. Right? So these are all correct answers, I think. But that was the last piece. There's this continuity of church life. The old ones move on to the new ones, and we recognize that, like the priests died in the Old Testament, church elders die and they get old and they retire, and there needs to be younger guys coming up in the ranks. Definitely. Yep. Yep, very good. Then lastly, let's read this last one here, and then we can open it up for discussion again. Who wants to take Acts 6, 3-6? Who's got that? If you want to get your thumb there already. Brooklyn's got it? Okay, so then I'll read the statement there, and then Brooklyn will take us to the text. A deacon must be chosen by the same kind of vote and set apart by prayer and laying on of hands as well. And then go ahead, Brooklyn. Okay, very good. Thanks, Brooklyn. Okay, so again, with deacons, it's a different kind of ministry, but it is a church office. And so the same kind of obvious consecration or singling out and transference of the continuity of the church gets put on those men as well. So the ordination process works similarly there. There's continuity, there's a calling out, there's a recognition by the church. All these things are true. And so if you've ever wondered why we do the strange things of laying on of hands, that is the rationale there. Discussion on this, any of this, the mechanisms used, anything. It's 10:07, so I don't think we're going to start another section, so we can hash this out. Inga. But you're not used to seeing that. Okay, interesting. How's that? That, okay. So never for elders or deacons. Okay, interesting. So Inga just shared, if you didn't hear her, Inga's sharing in her background, there was laying on of hands for the lead pastor, but not for office holders like elders and deacons. And so this was new. And she also mentioned she liked the reverence of the man being called to that office being on his knees, which is a sign of humility, right? Because really what you're doing, when you enter the Christian ministry, you are accepting a death sentence. And I say that with the biggest smile on my face, because I trust we have elders in waiting in this church who are yet to be recognized and called out. In the words of Inigo Montoya, prepare to die, okay? Because that is your future. If you're a church elder, you're accepting a death sentence. That means you don't get to just pick your hours, and you don't get to just pick which things you deal with. You're kind of signing up for life as it happens. And you will have to find a way to balance that with your marriage and with your children so that the church doesn't cost you everything, i.e. your family. That's very important. So you can't always be on call 24/7, but that will be a significant part of your life if you are called to the Christian ministry. Is you don't keep bankers' hours, and you don't keep bankers' responsibilities. So it is a different kind of life. And it's wonderful. So if you're one of those men who's going to be called at some future point, do it gladly, but glory is heavy. Glory weighs a ton, and that's what makes it worthwhile. With bless. Okay, yeah, and that would be another point, yeah. So Yannicka is also mentioning the symbolism of blessing, right? Like a father laying on a blessing, like, right? Abram laying his hands on Isaac and that kind of thing, right? Yes, so that's also being communicated as a blessing. And again, heaviness is not opposed to glory. Glory is heavy. Okay, so if you want to make a difference in the world with anything, not just church ministry, but if you want to do something well, just be prepared to not have weekends off, and the day is not done at 5 p.m. That's just, anything worth doing will not happen in bankers' hours, I promise you. Okay, and it will not happen without blood, sweat, and tears, whether that's starting a business, whether that's learning a trade, whether that's getting good at a sport, whether that's church ministry, whatever it is. You have a choice between leisure and excellence, but you will not have both. You can pick a lane, okay? And excellence, and whether it's, again, being Scotty Scheffler and being one of the world's best golfers is excellent, and it weighs something, it takes something, but that's just life. And I think for those called to church ministry, then it's the same principle. You can have leisure or you can be called to church ministry, but you can't do both. You will have to pick a lane. And if you want to pick leisure, then don't fool yourself as to what it might cost. So I think the Bible is just very honest about that. Yeah.
Something I've never seen till this church or heard of this church is the pastor and elder
Okay. Yeah, okay. Actually, that's a very interesting point. There's no right or wrong answer. This is an experience question, so I'm not going to take names and I'm not going to play it. To whom did you grow up with the impression that elder and pastor is the same thing, and who grew up those are two different things? The same thing? Pastor and elder? Okay, some. And who grew up those are different things? Well, okay, I don't have to count. Well, okay, so Ron's also pointing out, maybe, yeah, the elders are the local men, and even if you rotate them, it's all local men that you grew up with, right? But the pastor came from Aylmer, and he's on his way to Red Deer, and after that, he's on his way to Burnaby, and yeah, so there's that. Again, there is difference of opinion on this in different branches of Christianity. Most notably, Roman Catholics would categorize things differently. But in the mainstream of Protestant and Reformed Christianity, it's all the same office. An elder is a pastor is an elder. So even though I do the bulk of the preaching ministry, it is just as accurate, and I would even suggest we maybe learn this practice, to say Pastor Ray, or Pastor Tim, or Pastor Don. Because we all have the exact same office. One of us spends more time in preaching and teaching, but it's the exact same office. A pastor is not a super elder. I don't get 1.2 votes. I'm just the one, I am the elder who does the bulk of the teaching and preaching, but it's the exact same office. It's not a different kind of office because it is spiritual oversight of the church. So when the Bible uses a word like episkopoi, from which we get the word Episcopalian, or presbyteros, from which you get the word Presbyterian, it's the same office. A pastor is an elder, is a bishop, is an episcopoi. Different words, but there's the one office. So being, and again, it's almost without fail, in almost any church, not every church, you're going to have an elder who does the bulk of the preaching and teaching and who might be on staff. That may be, but it's not a different kind of office. It's the same office. And some would push that. See this sometimes in Baptist circles, rarely elsewhere. Some Baptists would say that means there needs to be a roughly equal rotation of preaching. And in some churches that happens, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there's a distinction made here too. If you go to 1 Timothy, I think it's 5:17. I'm not sure on that. Yeah, here we go. Here's exactly what Lisa was talking about. 1 Timothy 5:17. Okay, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. Couple things. Is this pure democracy? What are the elders doing? What are the elders doing? Really? And then the one who is laboring in preaching and teaching is of a different office, or is he from among that group? Same group? Same group? Here's your elders. And within that, all the governance happens in that body, but then some will preach and teach more than others. And elders are to be apt to teach, but that doesn't necessarily mean equal rotation of preaching and teaching. It can be private counsel, it can be devotionals, it can be other things. So I don't think it's mandated that everyone fills the exact same specific duties, but it is the same office, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching, meaning he comes from that body. And sometimes there was a very high-profile case of this. Remember the Steve Lawson controversy about 2 or 3 years ago? It was found out after, and this is sad because I love Steve Lawson. It was found out he was pastoring a church in Dallas that he wasn't even an elder at. He wasn't even a member there. But this church had enough resources to hire a rock star pastor who was not ordained as an elder there. Who is this man accountable to? That's no shade on Steve Lawson. I love the man. I think he's truly repentant, and he's doing repentance the right way. If anyone's noticed, he's not in front of a camera again. He's at a tiny little Presbyterian church in Pennsylvania of about 30 people under the oversight of their elders. That's humility. A 75-year-old man who was a Ligonier and master seminary and everything. So I'm moving to rural Pennsylvania, and I will submit to a tiny little backwoods church that no one ever hears about, and you'll never hear from me ever again. Because I disqualified from ministry, and me finishing the finish line is more important than getting my face in front of a camera again. So I commend Steve Lawson for that. But this situation should never have happened. You can't just hire a pastor who's not ordained and recognized by the local church as one of the elders. So that's a case we probably know about that did not turn out well when we found out all the information. But again, to reiterate to Lisa's question, an elder, a bishop, a pastor, a minister, different words for the exact same thing. There is not a difference as I understand it. And what I just gave would be the standard, well, I'd say in the English-speaking Reformed world, that would be the standard answer. In the Dutch world, obviously, it's gone a bit different. Yep. Right. Yeah, and some would distinguish teaching elders and ruling elders, also based on this verse, which I think is somewhat legitimate, but it's just recognizing some elders are going to do more teaching and some are going to work more in the background, and that's legitimate, but it's not a different type of office. It's the same office, and each man plays to his own strengths within that. Yeah. More on this. Yeah. Right. Okay, so Angela is asking about fasting, and now it's being promoted for intermittent fasting for health and weight loss purposes. Fine, but that's not what the Bible has in view. What the Bible has in view is dedicated prayer for specific things, usually more noticeable things. Well, I can say on behalf of all of us elders, we went through a pretty serious season of fasting when we were trying to, 4 years ago before Trinity started. What's next? We encouraged that as we looked for names for deacons. We encouraged that when making property decisions. So there's a conscience issue to this. I don't think anyone can tell someone else, you must fast on this and this day and fast from this or that. So I think there is conscience here for people who are going to fast for different periods of times over different things. That's true. But that doesn't mean the practice isn't worth practicing. If there's something serious, like installing new elders, which we want to do within the next reasonable time frame, that would be a good reason to fast and to dedicate to prayer. Which men is God calling to serve in that capacity, and to have dedicated time of prayer and fasting for something like that, I think is appropriate and to be encouraged. But I don't think it's either the kind of thing you can mandate another person, right? Like, Tina, you can't have coffee for the next 48 hours. No one wants to see that, she says. So, yeah. I don't think we can do that, but we can certainly encourage prayer and fasting for serious and sober occasions. Yeah. Okay, I've got 10:19, so we should shut it down here. And it's a good discussion. We can pick it up again next week, but we'll leave it there for now. Let's close in prayer. Father God, I want to thank you that you care so much about the church. You love your church, even when we are imperfect, even when we don't conduct ourselves with the glory and the beauty that we are called to. But yet, Lord, you are faithful, and you remain a faithful husband to us, and we want to thank you for that. And as we think about things that we don't maybe normally think about, like governance and offices and all these things that seem mundane, yet you care about them, and you care enough about them to include this in your word. And I pray that you would help us now as we consider what biblical church governance looks like, that we would conduct ourselves in a responsible and healthy way, that the deacons, the elders, the members would all take our responsibilities seriously, that we would carry those duties out with grace, with compassion, with conviction, and with a care for the overall health of the church, and most importantly for the glory of your name and what it's communicating to the world around us. Lord, I pray that you'd be with us now as we enjoy a time of fellowship. I pray that that would be edifying and uplifting, and then I pray that you would also prepare our hearts for corporate worship. Lord, that you would be honored, glorified, and that we can worship in spirit and truth and be fed by your hand. Thank you for your kindness. We pray this all in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.